it picks up this time. Now we're live. Okay, so welcome to Key to Bahama.
Hi, how are you guys?
Hello. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming and all that good stuff. Looks like we had a few technical difficulties before, but we're here now. Cordy, you already have us live?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'm not seeing it on my side just yet, but we can keep going forward. But let's just take this thing from the top. So, Laquita, there's been a lot of crazy things going on right now, especially in the U.S. and different parts with all these protests, a lot of this anger, angst, a lot of things going on. Kind of what's been your experience with the protests? Like, how are you feeling about it? Have you seen any wins? Like, kind of let me know how you see it across the pond.
Well, I believe that we've had some, I think the initial.
Cordy,
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I accidentally started.
I think
live going in the background.
I think what the protests and what they initially started for, I think the initial goal has been met so far. I don't think it would have been met without the cities being torn down and burned to the bones. I don't think we would have gotten the results, these initial results that they were looking for. I do believe that this is just the beginning, and if they aren't careful, they may have some very long nights of buildings being burned and torn to pieces.
Okay. I think I was against the protests, like 100% before I read one of the posts on your page. And one of the posts you were kind of speaking to some of the things that had been changing and different things like that. And it really kind of it forced me to look at the situation like, okay, there's two different perspectives we can look at this from. And even when I say how I feel about the protest not working, I feel like no matter what was going on and no matter what we were doing, I would have been there to support. I would have been out there in the streets marching and all of those different things. Agreeing or not agreeing is not a reason not to support our brothers and sisters all over the world who are protesting.
Right.
Yes, I was looking for that strategy, that these are the steps that would approach the system as opposed to dealing with these one-off situations, meaning the whole system is corrupt and you're talking about following police and installing new laws and creating new systems. We still have to look at laws already existed that were for the equality of people. We were just not included in that list of people. So until we are seen as people, no matter what laws we put in place, it's going to be difficult for us to get our equal representation under that law. But it's really interesting to kind of see that now I'm seeing, I think we mentioned before that people are putting some money behind it. Can you kind of give me some feedback? I think, Cordy, you were talking about that as well, but like, how do you feel about us finally making this more of an economic movement with Blackout Tuesday and other initiatives? Hello?
Yeah, so as far as the economics goes about it, I think that whether via rage or consciousness, it has also turned our focus towards each other. And we've had, because although we're having all of these riots and looting and protesting and all that, we also still have COVID-19 that's an immediate issue. And we've had so many people lose jobs. It was 33 million unemployed, I think by April. And a lot of us did not receive the funding that was given to small businesses for assistance during this time. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of our businesses were or are suffering. So to see our people really kind of turn our focus on each other, I've seen people, one business here in Atlanta that has been open for 40 years. The business, I think the daughter posted on Instagram or Twitter or something that they were struggling to stay open and they may be about to close. And within a day or two, they had more business than they could handle from our community. And then there was some businesses that were damaged during the rioting and looting. And our community came together and funded those businesses to be able to rebuild and reopen when things settle down. So I think that economically, it's also helped us. Oh, and we've also, whether it be rage or consciousness, we've also been taking our money to Black banks.
Yes. That's amazing. Again, I feel like we put ourselves in a position over these last however long is that we don't really have leverage. So it seems like we're coming and asking for people to give us equality out of charity or give us attention to certain issues out of the goodness of your heart. And I think sometimes we realize that in certain cases, people didn't necessarily accumulate the power and wealth and different things that they have by hand holding and hugs and different stuff like that. I don't think they would let it go by those means. And when you start talking about the money part, I do believe that not the only, but part of the leverage that we can create is going to have to be by creating our own economic basis. And that's why I was really interested in some of the different projects you're working on, some of the different things. And I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit later. But what I'm really interested in is you kind of telling us a little bit more before we go too far into what's going on in the US. Tell me a little bit more about kind of you and what you're doing, because I feel like you're connected to the continent of Africa. You've been going back and forth to Africa, and you found a way to actually have a bi-continental lifestyle, which usually I hear some of us moving somewhere and staying there and living there, but kind of like, tell me what that experience has been like, coming from the US and then moving into Accra and going back and forth in that part.
Okay, well, in 2011, I made my first trip to Ghana, a solo trip. I wasn't gonna wait on people anymore. So I decided I would make a trip. I went and this beautiful young man was there to escort me around and, see me through for about 15 days. And we got married. We had kids. And he came to America. And like, it just kind of snowballed into this life that I have now, where in 2012, by 2012, I had traveled to Ghana like 4 or 5 times. And so between September of 2011 to August of 2012, I had been to Ghana like 5 times. And I fell in love with the place. I literally fell in love with the place. On top of I fell in love with the man, I fell in love with the place. The place was absolutely amazing. It's I just felt at home in Ghana, and I knew that I would move there eventually. I didn't think that I would move there as fast as we did, but in 2000, and by the time my husband got here in 2012, within 2 weeks of him being here, he was like, "Oh, hell no, we gonna have to go back. We gonna have to move somewhere." He was just like, "We have to move somewhere." He's like, "This is not gonna be." He's like, "Maybe Canada, maybe South America, maybe Ghana." And I was like, "Ghana. I feel at home in Ghana. You're from Ghana. It feels great for me. So let's just go back to Ghana. So within a few months of him being here, we started planning to move to Ghana. And in 2014, we made our initial big move to Ghana. And we've been back and forth ever since.
Nice. So tell me, how did you feel when you first got off the plane in Ghana for the first time? What was it like?
So I always tell people it's not something that you can really put into words. But it was dark when I got to Ghana. So it's like 11 p.m. I get there, and when I get off the plane, it just felt like the wind just wrapped around me and gave me a big hug and was like, it had nothing to do with the people. It had nothing to do with the sights, because I couldn't see anything except the shadows of trees or palm trees, and I could kind of hear things, but it just felt good. And it felt like I never knew what it felt like to be home. But as soon as I got off the plane, it was like, oh, what is this? And I realized I felt at home in Ghana from the very moment I stepped off the plane.
And, Bakita, it's very interesting that you say that, because I actually had a very similar experience when I came to Ghana for the first time. So when I got off the plane, I had actually flown in from Italy. I came in, I think it maybe about 10:30, 11. It was one of the last flights at Katoka. And I come out of the airport, and I remember just the air being like this humid heat type, and seeing the backlight of the palm trees. And something just clicked, like, this is it for me. And I tell people, one thing you want to realize when you're moving abroad is that find some place that you get that feeling or feels like home. For you and I, it's Ghana. But for other people, it may be another country. I think you need to understand who you are, and really home is where the heart is. And I think that we have to be very aware that maybe the African continent may not be for everyone. But for those of us where it is, it's a great opportunity and great things are happening there.
Yeah, I've had people I know who live and feel at home in South America, in Central America, in Australia. I have a friend that's been living in Australia for I think she moved to Australia right before I moved to Ghana, and she's been there this entire time.
Exactly. So I think that that's always important to remember, is that when you are looking at moving abroad, don't really take other people's opinions, because where I feel at home may not be where you feel at home. So I think it's very important that you actually go sort of see the terrain for yourself and make sure that it is actually ideal for you, and that you're not falling in love with somebody else's impression of it.
Yeah, because I've been to other African nations, and I didn't get that same feeling. Like, it was great, don't get me wrong, but it just wasn't what I felt when I got to Ghana. And I just think everyone needs to just know what you're looking for.
Yes, I think that's why it's also very, very important that Black people, that we travel, that we see new places. And if you can't travel and see new places, then do your best to import that experience by meeting new people. Again, when you mentioned the way you all felt in Accra when you first landed, I had that feeling when I was in Jamaica. My father's side of the family was Jamaican, but I had never had the opportunity to kind of go there and visit myself. And I remember kind of, tearing up the mountains, going to all these different places. But it was really when I sat there on the beach, and it was just warm, the weather, listening to the water, the wind. And that's when it clicked. And it was like, there are people in this world who live like this every single day of their life. And it kind of caused me to look at what is important to me, kind of what are the things that I hold valuable about the lifestyle that I'm living in, running this rat race in the United States, where I'm working 80 hours a week and not enjoying my life, and just having that bliss in that moment. But that's what kind of started the bug that had me needing to move, needing to see things for myself. So it's very interesting that you say that. And then with this, with the conversation of travel now, again, you have 4 children. You have a big family. This is a real legitimate family. This is not the starter kit. This is not.
No.
So, so when you're getting out here and you're traveling, this is not like going to McDonald's or going across the street or going to the park. You're going through some things. So kind of let me know what it's like traveling back and forth with a family.
Well, it is a coordinated effort. So I have an 18-year-old, a 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And then it's me and my mom. My mom has traveled with us, and my husband, of course. So we usually have enough hands on deck for the smaller children and to keep everyone corralled. And they've pretty much gotten so used to traveling that we don't have the issues that you know, a lot of people have with children running around and all of that stuff. They kind of know, you know, they kind of know the drill at this point. And but what we do is we go very minimalistic when we're traveling. We don't carry all of those carry-ons and all of that stuff or whatever. We try to check all of the bags that we have, even if we have to pay for extra baggage. We'll just check everything and only carry the things that are necessary to help us travel well through the process, because we're usually going from America to somewhere in Europe or to another African country, or to once we went from America to Canada to London, then to Ghana. It was a lot, but we made it. And it's just a matter of kind of just getting the whole family has to be on board and on how we're gonna make this happen, especially the bigger hands.
And I think really what people are wondering is, how do we actually, so financially, you know, a lot of times people say, you know, I'd love to live abroad, but the money, I can't afford to take trips back and forth. So if I get there, I won't be able to see my family as much as I see my family now. When you look at the sort of the financial aspects and plans, what are some of the things that have helped you so that you can actually live this bicontinental lifestyle with your family? Is it sort of sacrificing certain things that you typically buy? Is it just, you know, having a well set out financial plan? Is it investments? What has sort of been your helping grace for doing this? And just shout out to everyone looking on the Facebook page. I think Sean will be going through and looking at comments and other things shortly, just to sort of see if we have questions. But if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll get back with you. So just talk a little bit about your financial plan, please, Akita.
Well, it's a pretty much like a hybrid type of thing. My husband is an importer, exporter, and then for most of these years, I've been really a stay-at-home mom, and my husband has been financing our lifestyle almost entirely. I only in the last maybe 2 years have I been able to spend more time actually focused on building businesses and building NGOs and things of that nature. Although I spent the majority of the time, you know, building relationships and things of that nature, financially, my husband has been our funding agent. But it's a lot of it is sacrificing, and we decide that we would rather be able to live in both places. And it's not cheap and we're not rich, but we plan. Like I'm the person who plans. My husband is Ghanaian, so a lot of things happen on the last minute. But you
as someone married to a Ghanaian, I'm going to second that.
So
I think my inner spirit is Ghanaian, so yeah, I can confirm.
a lot of things do happen last minute. Like some people always say, well, where are you? Because it does happen that sometimes my husband will say, okay, we need to go to Ghana. And I'm like, when? And he's like it may be, today is Saturday. He may say, oh, we're going to Ghana Monday. Monday? Are you crazy? But I figure it out and make it happen. And many times it's like stalking. I have to stalk like different websites for tickets and all of these things. A lot of times we buy one-way tickets because we don't know what our, most of the time we buy one-way tickets because we don't know how long we're gonna be anywhere. And we have experienced buying round trip tickets and then staying over and having to pay extra fees and all of these things. So we've gotten in the habit of pretty much trying to find the cheapest one-way ticket we can, which is why we usually end up going through a lot of different countries. But we make it work.
Yes, I've had a similar experience.
And I'm just wondering, what are the dynamics with schooling with your children? Because as you mentioned, you have a large range from, I think it was 18 to 4. So what has the schooling experience been like, and how have you been able to maneuver that being bicontinental?
Well, so for the most part, they've all been under school age. They're just getting to school age. So the 6-year-old and the 4-year-old, but the 18-year-old, she's of course been along for the ride since she was like 12, I think, when we first moved. She went to private school in Ghana for the majority of the time that we were in Ghana. And then there came a point where we started moving about a lot. So I began to homeschool her. And we pretty much ended up, we pretty much took on more of a homeschooling lifestyle than going to traditional school. And it just works better for us to just homeschool.
Okay. So that's an interesting option. And so it looks like homeschooling, for those people looking at moving abroad with children, might actually be an option. And I know there are a lot of resources out there. And if you've had children during the pandemic, it's probably second nature at this point anyway.
Yeah. This was good training for people who want to even transition into homeschooling.
Yeah, I think it's very important though that we do play a bigger role in the education of our children, even if we don't go as far as like homeschooling. We do have to understand that a lot of the systems that we use weren't necessarily created for our greatest benefit when it comes to the lesson material. We kind of touched on that on the last call, the last conference that we had, is that in the American education system, they really kind of focus on slavery and nothing before. And then from the African perspective, they don't really tell a lot about slavery. So it's very interesting that you brought that up as well.
That was one of the greatest parts of my daughter going to school in Ghana. She's been taught to be to ask questions and to be very I wouldn't say aggressive, but they call it aggressive in Ghana. But it's inquisitive, and she questions everything. And because of her homeschooling going back and forth, she knows a lot. So it was sometimes very interesting to see what the dynamics were for her in school, because like they would be learning something and it wasn't being discussed in a manner that it will be discussed in the British manner. And you know, she has African liberation teaching at school at home. So you know, she was able to help educate people in school in Ghana also.
Okay. Well, that's such a beautiful thing, and I think that when you just talk about exchanges, I mean, it's just something that I think is really an amazing thing that we have. And I think really what people know, because you do something that Black people have been doing in the U.S. since the beginning of time, which is farming.
Yeah.
And I think that when people look at you, they probably like, I'm not so sure she looks like a farmer. So can you just talk a little bit about Aqua Farms, what exactly it is, how you got this particular idea, and how's everything been going for you with it?
Well, Aqua Farms, Aqua Farms Africa is my pride and joy. I kind of fell into farming. I went to university for biology. I was a biology major and a chemistry minor. I intended to be a physician, but as I began to learn more about the bureaucracy of healthcare, I decided that I did not want to be involved in that anymore. So
Well done.
Yeah. So I decided that I needed to find something else. So it took a little while. I may have to oh snap. I'm sorry, y'all. My computer is trying to down. I may have to switch over to another device.
No problem. In the meanwhile, I mean, we can always just give you a few minutes. So I think just to recap for those joining, today we have Bakita Mahama. And Bakita Mahama is COO of Aqua Farms, which is a farm that operates on the African continent. So far this morning, what we've really been talking about is how does she actually go back and forth with a family of 4? And I think what I've learned from Bakita is that it's really about proper planning. She is married to a Ghanaian, so he really does a lot of the financing. She more is a stay-at-home mom, but they do have a lot of sacrifices. I think one thing that I really picked up from our earlier conversation with her is that you don't have to be rich to do this. It's really about being able to plan your dynamics well. And for those of you interested in schooling and how she's doing this with 4 children, she mentioned that her oldest daughter is the one that's really sort of been during school age. So she's attended private school in Ghana, where it was a great exchange between the African students and her because it sort of led more to that diaspora talking. But homeschooling has also been an option for her, particularly during times where they're moving a lot. I think that one of the things that I've also picked up from this conversation now is that the protests this week, we have seen some good, but we're not expecting there to be a monumental change based off of this. And so because of that, you really have to look at where is going to be best for you. Bakita and I decided to make our homes in Ghana. Sean is in Nigeria, but we really encourage people to look at countries, other countries that may be best for you. Next week, we've got Corey Yoakley, who will be in from Luxembourg. Very interesting story. She's actually a single mom abroad, so I think that that'll be a very interesting story for people to be able to hear. We also have Kedra King coming up the following Saturday, who lives in Thailand. She's lived there for about 2 years now. She actually moved there without a plan. So I think that while we're looking at Black while abroad, where as much as we want people to be involved in and move to the African continent, we also understand the African continent may not be feasible for everyone. So I think that it's really important that you figure out and find a place that's home for you. And I think, Sean, you were talking about your experience in Jamaica, and I know you moved from Ghana to Nigeria. So what made Nigeria, I guess, feel more at home for you than Ghana?
To me, what made Nigeria feel a lot more like home, I think, was the speed. Nigeria has about 20 million people there. So when you're looking at business, when you're looking at thought process, how people think, when you look at the expat bubble that we'll undoubtedly find ourselves in, the expat bubble was more relatable here than it was in Accra as well. So it was just
elaborate on the expat bubble, because mind you, I feel like not everybody, one, knows what an expatriate is, and 2, understands the expat bubble.
Okay, so for me, I might not even know what an expat is. I assume it's when you have people who move to a different country to live there. But when you talk about the expat bubble, what it typically consists of is that as an American or as a person from a different country, especially a more developed country, there are certain assumptions that people have when it concerns you. There are certain places you're going to go, and of course, you're going to have people of like minds who like to be around each other. So in Accra, I found that the expat bubble it wasn't as black as I wanted it to be. Let's put it, if we're just going to be honest, it just wasn't as black as I wanted it to be. When I moved to Nigeria, I found more people from this type of circles that I ran with back at home. I found people who identified more with my thought patterns. And then even locally, the local people, since Lagos is in its own way a very exposed place, I just found people that I aligned with value-wise more in Nigeria. So that expat bubble here technically served my needs more than the one in Accra.
Okay, and it looks like Takeda, I think, is back.
Yeah, if I could, I would like to elaborate on the expat thing.
Yeah.
So from my experience, or from my point of view, an expat is someone who comes into a country to work. That's strictly what they're there for. They come in and they usually work for an international company or something of that nature. And they're really there to make money. And then we have, of course, our repatriate community, who are those of us who are relocating back to the continent. And when I initially moved to Ghana, I was not a part of the repatriation community. I found myself amongst the expatriate community, which was okay, but it wasn't what I was looking for. So I totally agree with Sean in the sense that the expat community it doesn't look like us in Ghana. And for the most part, when you go to expat events or whatever the case may be in Ghana, you're going to find yourself more with Australians and Lebanese and Indian and Dutch, and it's
Germans.
It's everybody else. And the truth of it, I met Cordy via the expat community. I would have probably run into you eventually, but I think that I met you during my expat days. But
yeah.
I really wanted a more of a Black experience in Africa. I didn't come to Africa to make my life with other people. So I did
white people.
I did. So I really was yearning.
Black.
Yeah, I was really yearning for that familiarity of my own kind. And once I then got introduced to the repatriation community, and then there was a lot of people from Atlanta and New York and Detroit. Then it was like, oh, okay, I might be able to do this.
Yeah, and I agree with you as well. I think, this is another thing that people need to think about when they're moving is what type of experience are you seeking? I know a lot of Black people that are looking to move abroad now are seeking probably maybe more authentic Black experiences that are very different from what we have in the U.S. And I think that you need to be aware that when you move into these countries, you do almost have to seek out your community. Your community is just not going to show up. I'm like, hey, I'm over here on the West Side.
Exactly.
Like, it is an active thing that you have to do. So you shouldn't have the false impression that, particularly people, I think, have this false impression about Africa that, just because I moved to Africa, like, I'm going to fit in with everybody around me.
Exactly.
Because as much as you can leave a country, the culture stays with you. So I think the key that you and I have had to talk before about how it's so nice to be able to get together and play spades. I mean, have barbecues. Listen to the same type of music. Like, these are things that, like, you can't, like, if you don't seek out these experiences, you're just not going to arrive in another country and the experiences are there for you. And I do think in European and Asian countries, you do sometimes have to seek them out a little bit harder. Because you are still a place where you're the minority. But once again, it all comes back to what's important to you. What are your deal breakers when you're looking at living abroad? But let's get back to your farm, because once again, people look at you, they don't see farmer.
They do not
you guys
see
have been
farmer.
featured in Forbes 3 times. I mean, let's say that again, you've been featured in Forbes 3 times. So obviously you're doing something right. So let's talk about those opportunities in farming, how you got into it and where it's taken you. I noticed you pull out the notebook. Y'all get ready. She's about to drop the knowledge.
Yeah, I want to make sure I cover some of our key points. My partners are like, you need to make sure they know everything. So, okay. So, with Aquafarms Africa, we are a Pan-African, a staunch Pan-African company. It's only us, it's by us, it's for us, and we'll sell to them, but we only will allow us to own. We use the aquaponic methodology for farming, which is aquaculture, which is fish farming, and hydroponics, which is growing food in water. We chose this type of farming because as I travel around Africa, I found that a lot of the food, 80% of the food at least in West Africa, is imported from other places. And I couldn't understand why. Like, why are we importing so much food? We have so many people who are unemployed. 77% of the youth in West Africa are unemployed. And I needed to figure out what could we do to have sustainable growing methods, eco-friendly growing methods. Like, we needed to find something that was going to not only disrupt the system of importation, but not harm our continent even further. We have issues with water, issues with space, issues with infrastructure and logistics were all of the reasons why I was finding more importation of food than actually using the continent to grow our food and to move our food about. So you would have, let's say, tomatoes that were grown in the interior of Ghana, and a whole truck of tomatoes may go to waste because either the road got washed out, or the truck broke down, or some kind of either infrastructure or logistical process that fails regularly. And so becoming an urban farmer is what I am, which is one who farms either in the city or close to a city. Yeah, so we chose aquaponics because it saves, we use 95% less water than traditional farming. We chose aquaponics over hydroponics because of the fact that with aquaponics, you have to be very careful about using chemicals. Go back outside.
For those who don't know, we have children, so sometimes we have to step into mommy role.
I'm sorry, guys.
This is real life. I saw the facial expression. I started looking like, oh, did I pay attention?
So we use. I'm sorry.
We all know that Black mama expression. That back up.
I had a flashback.
So yeah, you were talking about to use less water.
Yeah, so we use 95% less water than traditional farming. There's no runoff because with fish are very finicky creatures. So you can't just put anything into the system to help it grow. You have to be very strategic and methodical about how you care for the fish so that they'll produce the waste that we need for the plants. So it's a closed loop system.
And circular economy.
Yeah. So the fish waste is used to fertilize the plants, and the plants clean the water that goes back to the fish.
That's so interesting. And you know, a lot of times we talk about how technology is really difficult to implement on the continent, and I think even farmers here in America, sometimes Black farmers particularly, have struggles with getting into this new technology and some of these new farming techniques. But you also, one thing that really struck me about your company is that you talk about how you partner for success and to help support other entrepreneurs. So can you sort of talk to me a little bit about what those partnerships look like and how you're working on ground to even support the local farmers that you encounter?
Yeah, so we actually have a partner already in the Bokeh region of Guinea, a young farmer who he won a contest in Conakry. And that in that contest, he had a certain amount of money, and because of that, we were able to take his budget, and I sat down with him and figured out what kind of system we could build, what size system we could build him, so that he could start his own farm. And so what I did was I helped him to create a system that he only had a few $1,000s at the time. So what I did was created a system that would be easy for him to scale up as he grows.
And can you just tell me a little bit about the impact? How is that doing? Do you see yourself expanding? And it's interesting you mentioned Guinea, because Guinea is a French-speaking country. So now I get to use my small French. Parlez-vous français?
Muy
No.
poquito.
Muy poquito.
Tu n'es pas français?
No, I speak very, 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 very little French. I was really blessed in the sense that my assistant in Guinea, I think they enabled me more than they helped me, because my assistant speaks English. He speaks American English and British English, and I think it kind of handicapped me in my language learning.
So it does go to show you can actually, though, do business in a country where you don't necessarily speak the language as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It takes a lot more effort and a lot more grit, but it's doable. It's more than doable.
Okay. And I know something else that's really interesting about your business is, one thing, like I said, you've been featured in Forbes 3 times. You can never say enough about Forbes. And why do you think that Aqua Farms, what is your key to success in Aqua Farms? And if you can talk about how much money you started it off with, and then if Aqua Farms is even currently seeking other partners for those people that might be watching, that may have interest in reaching out to you to sort of figure out, hey, how can I sort of get in on this venture that's already built to help support it grow and help my own portfolio grow? What would you say about that?
So right now, with this whole COVID-19 thing, we aren't taking any new partners on right now. We are in Guinea, we're a business to business company. So we felt it really quickly. Like, we felt the effects of closing the countries, closing businesses, and all of those things. It affected us quickly because we serve hotels and restaurants in Conakry, and within, they closed immediately, so right now we are pretty much just keeping our farm in motion, but what we're looking forward to is, once the countries begin to open back up and things get back on track, that we will begin to be able to take partners.
Okay. And just real quick, one of the things that we talked about is how you have to actually find your group when you come to a particular country. And I know something else you did, you talked about some of the NGOs that you've done. I think you have a sister care, so maybe you can talk a little about that, but maybe you can also talk about the sister repack community that you built for those women that are interested in repatriating to Ghana?
Yeah, well, remember I mentioned that when I first got to Ghana, I was a part of the expat community. And while they were very helpful, I learned a lot. They helped me to find a lot of things that I was looking for as far as food and places to hang out and all of those things. It was something missing. And what was missing was the familiarity of people who are from where I'm from. And at that time, I was a part of a larger repatriation group.
Makita, I think your sound went out.
Can you hear me now?
Are you sure?
Yeah,
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So I was a part of a larger repatriation group that had like 17,000 people in it. And it was a lot of going back and forth all of the time. So I decided to create a more niche group for women who were actually moving to Ghana, living in Ghana, or thinking about it. And with this group, what we do is we talk with women and we give our real life experience of living in Ghana and doing business in Ghana, and just all of the things that you can't even imagine before you move that would like, Cordy, we've talked about nannies and house help and washing clothes and all of the things that as
building
women,
houses. Yeah.
building houses. So all of the things that because a lot of women are moving as single women. And I believe that it's important for women, period, to just know what you're getting into when you're making this move. Some women are moving and getting married. So that's where someone like me would come into play. So we pretty much try to have a broad spectrum of women who are able to contribute to the conversation.
Okay, I think that's a beautiful thing. I also am a member of the Sister Repatriation Group, and I know I found it beneficial for a lot of things because, like you said, we discussed so many topics, and I do think you've hit the nail on the head. I don't know how many single women we have watching, but oftentimes I see single women seem to be a little bit more hesitant to actually move outside of the country. I think a large part of this is because a lot of times people sort of envision themselves being married and moving with their spouse and having children. So it's a little bit harder to leave those things that are familiar. But I moved to Ghana at 30 as a single woman, dated in a different culture, which was an interesting experience alone because we talk about dating in Ghana, which maybe we'll spend a few minutes about because Sean has a boo, Room K, that's Nigerian. So I think cross-cultural relationships are always very funny. But I think that it's very interesting that we see a surge of single women. And I like to say that, I'm a testimony that you can meet your significant other abroad, and have a child and get married and sort of do all these other things. I don't think you have to wait for all of the pieces to actually be in place. And I think that for single people as well, I don't know if everybody just sort of wants to talk, because when you came to Ghana that first time, were you single or had you already known your husband? Sort of what was that dynamic?
Well, so the way I met my husband was through his brother. His brother was my friend here in America. And I wanted to marry an African from the continent. I wanted that.
Is this date match?
It was, I believe that people who know you are good at a lot of times they're good at matching you up. And my brother-in-law, I think he did a really good job by matching us up. So we started talking in like 2008. And it took me some time because I was a single woman to get the courage to make that trip. My brother-in-law, he made it he made me feel very comfortable with making the trip because, of course, he he offered to take me, and there was a few times where that was supposed to happen, but it didn't go quite the way we needed it to, and I ended up going by myself. But I felt very comfortable by the time 2011 came around, and it was time to make the trip.
Good. And Sean, maybe you want to share your experience, a male perspective, because I know Sean has been a serial dater. Finally, near his 40s, he's settling down. So we're happy. We're happy to see that he's maturing well. So I don't know if you also want to share your experience dating, because I know this is also a concern for a lot of single people when looking at living abroad.
Yeah.
Patriarchy exists in this world in many different elements. So I would say from a single male perspective, there's probably so much I can't say as a God-fearing man on a family-oriented channel right now. But I would say that a lot of people look at spending a lot of money and going into some of these places. Like I always said, I was going to go to Brazil before I died for specific reasons. There's the Vegas trips. There's these other different things. You can have that type of experience in a completely different way in different places in the African continent. There's so much fun to be had. And I think that from my perspective, it was looking at coming from America, Black America being kind of at the low end of the totem pole as far as the nationwide global dating, whatever, and then coming to the African continent. And then as soon as you start talking, somebody look up like, oh, who's that? Who is he? Who is that person? Yeah. So kind of, you get the
I will say that my stock, the type of men I got to date in Ghana was like 10 times better than those I was like in the US.
Yes.
Because we're exotic. We are the exotic
We
Negroes.
are exotic.
The moment they hear that accent, it's like, it's like you just raised.
Yeah.
With that being said, it's an icebreaker. It's you can just walk up and that kind of the introduction experience, because I know from a man's perspective, like kind of that first conversation, how do you break the ice? How do you approach the woman? What do I say in the first 5 seconds that makes me seem like I'm interesting, and all those different things that kind of play out in our mind. And for me, it was just, hello, how are you? Oh, you're beautiful. And
we don't need the eyes on Facebook, Sean. This is it. We don't need the eyes. I mean,
we don't even have that.
Not seducing nobody.
We're being real here. I gave them the Drake squint at every given moment. We're being real here. So that happened. Yeah. So and then there's parties, and then the thing with Ghana is that Ghana in particular, even what I see in the African culture, is people are what we say very coded. Meaning people do not want their business out there in the streets. People do not want you talking about what happened here and what happened there and who you've seen. It's a very, very, very close-knit society. So once again, when you're talking about kind of picking your community or finding out who your crowd is, I was able to find a crowd in Nigeria that for me, they were still coded, but they were more of a free type of people. And you have to really find people, again, who your soul vibes with, whether it be in the dating world or making friendships.
You know what, Sean, I think you bring up an excellent point, because like I said, I moved when I was 30, and I was really living my best life. And I was really taboo at a certain point, because I did go to bars alone. I went out to eat alone. I did so many things that probably the average Ghanaian woman wouldn't have done. So It was like I was intriguing, but yet I was a little bit taboo. Because what is she doing? She's all over the place. She doesn't have a plan, She sleeps there until 10 a.m. So I think that that is also a really thing to hit on, is that, and I think that's why these, like the sister repatriation community, is really nice, because you can sort of link with people that sort of understand you and your lifestyle. Because like you said, I think people don't understand the African lifestyle and culture is a little bit more conservative.
It's very
So you only get
conservative.
a certain, so you only get a certain type of person that goes to the club every weekend. You only
Right.
get a certain type of person that, you know, is out with dinner on this guy on Tuesday and you dating another guy on Friday.
Right.
Like, you only, that's not a regular occurrence in the society. So I think that you hit the nail right on the head. But while as much as we're talking about the fun aspect of it, I think I'd like to take a few minutes just to talk about the impact, because for me, I think that when you are African American or Black American and you're looking at moving abroad to whatever society you're looking at, you really need to be looking at making an impact. And you need to be looking at how you can improve that society or how you can bring something to that society. And I know the one thing I think that all of us share is that we all have NGOs. I talked about Environment 360 a little bit last week and how it's impacting in the informal sector. So, Bakita, why don't you talk more about your Sister Care NGO and sort of what exactly you hope to achieve, or sort of what is your goal behind that, and how you think others can perhaps contribute to that as well?
Okay, well, Sister Care was is an NGO that I started with our group. And basically it came down to, I had my third daughter, the third one in Ghana.
And that baby's a leap year baby too, isn't it, Bakita?
Yes, she was born she's a leap year baby, yeah.
So she only has a birthday once every 4 years.
Yes, she just turned 1.
Save money on a birthday present.
Yeah, so she was born in Ghana. I wasn't supposed to have her there. My intentions was to have her in America, and I had an emergency and ended up being in the hospital in Ghana for a little under a month. And during that time, I found myself in a position where I had no idea what I needed to be in the hospital in Ghana. So it was like a mad dash to gather all of these things that I needed. So, you know, pretty much you have to bring everything except the bed when you come to the hospital in Ghana. So I needed sheets and pillows and a bucket and
house shoes.
And yeah, I need everything. I needed everything. And then the baby needed everything.
Yeah.
So,
and it's like taking the home birth experience to the hospital.
To the hospital. Yeah. That's exactly like how it was. It was like just gather up everything and go to the hospital. So what we decided from that experience, trying to turn that into some way that I could help, or that we could help, we created these mother baby bags. That was the beginning of Sister Care. The first thing we did was created some mother baby bags. So for women who may end up in the same kind of situation that I was in, where it was kind of like an emergency and they need their stuff now, we created those bags that we could just say, okay, here, like the nurses could say, okay, we have a patient who needs things now, and we could either deliver it to them or have left them at the hospital so that they could give them to those who were in need. And then Sister Care is evolving into a more, a bigger service where we're helping women to figure out how to start their businesses, figure out what moving would look like, housing, all of the things that you need to actually make this transition into Ghana and society. Sister Care will help to make that happen.
And I think that's a great idea, because I know I wish I'd have had probably some additional help when I was coming into Ghana. And I know Sean has a very similar business, I think, in Nigeria, where he also helps people relocate, because it's not as straightforward as it looks. You know, my story is I showed up with 3 suitcases and sort of made it work. And I think looking back sometimes, I feel like that was the craziest thing I ever did. I don't know what was going through my mind when I hopped on that plane or why. I don't know if that air had just got me. But like sometimes now when I'm 39, I look back and I'm like, how did I just get up and leave with 3 suitcases, $5,000, and no plan.
Faith, baby. It takes faith to do that.
Cordy, you set me up because I came here thinking like if she did it, it must be easy for me to do. That must be how you do things. I was out here in this world. There were many of nights where I was like, the only reason I know I can do this is because it was already done before I
It's
came.
been done before. Yeah,
But
you have to. It takes a certain type of person to make this move. We have to just keep it real. That people make it seem like moving to, you just get on the plane and move to Africa. No, it takes a certain kind of person with a resilience and a certain kind of zeal for freedom that to make this move. People think you think it's hard to move from, let's say, the South to New York. That's pretty much the same kind of situation. You moving, you have to have some grit about you to make this move. And I think those of us who are able to make it happen is because we really want it to happen. We're not willing to give up on it happening, and we'll do whatever it takes to make it happen.
Yeah, and I do think that's important. And once again, I think that, yes, we represent the African experience, but I have a girlfriend that we'll interview in August, but I mean, she's from South Philly, and I mean, she lives in Paris now. And it's really interesting because if you know anything about South Philly, this is like the hood. And I mean, it's very interesting to sort of see the tenacity. But I think that any country you move to, don't underestimate it. And I think something else you need to realize is a lot of times we visit countries and we go on vacation and we feel like, I love this country. Like, this country is it for me. So I'm sure some of you might have gone to the UK. Maybe you've hit Ghana up. Maybe you've been over to Jamaica or Thailand. You've been to these different countries and you felt like, hey, I could live here. This is really cool. But I think that living the experience is different than vacationing from the experience. So I don't know if we want to take a few minutes and sort of touch on that as well. Sort of what are the differences that you see sort of when you're visiting a place versus when you actually are living in a place?
So I would say that, my initial visit to Ghana, I was there for 15 days. Then throughout the next year or so, I went to Ghana 4 or 5 times, and I spent maybe 8 or 10 days each time. And each time I was living in a hotel, I was living off, I was vacationing essentially. And then we moved. And in about, I'll say between 3 to 6 months, it's all still new, it's all still great. And then that newness wear off and reality hits. And it's like, oh, snap. I live on the other side of the world. What was I thinking? What am I going to do? I can't go to Pizza Hut. Well, we can go to Pizza Hut now, but at that time I couldn't go to Pizza Hut. And I don't know where to get this. And I don't know how to do that. Like, everything.
And the people don't understand me.
Yeah, the people don't understand me. I spend so much time explaining and re-explaining and explaining again what I'm trying to find or what I'm like. It can be overwhelming, but it's doable. Like, going into the market, I had to learn to go into the market because I had been used to going to Palace and ShopRite and all this stuff, and my husband was like, hey, my mom was able to feed 7 of us with 100 CDs a week. I need you to get on a budget.
And for those who don't know, 100 CDs is about $20.
Right. And I'm like, how am I going to feed all of these people with $20? And he's like, I need you to figure it out. You're spending too much money on food, because you know, here
Yes.
we're so used to buying food in bulk and putting it in the refrigerator. And a lot of times I had to learn that I couldn't buy a lot of food at the time because it was spoiled so fast, because they don't use a lot of pesticides and they don't use a lot of preservatives. So I wasted so much money in that. So I had to learn to go into the market. I built relationships with some women in the market so that I knew I was getting a decent price. And then I started, you know, I actually had a woman in the market help me. She was a mother, and I'm like, I need help. How do I feed all of these people with this little bit of money? And she helped me. And another sister from the repatriation community, I reached out to her and I asked her the same thing, like, what do I do? How do I feed my family on a budget and not go to ShopRite or not go to Palace or not go to Game? And she would walk me through.
There. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
She started to walk me through it. Like, I would be on the phone with her while I'm in the market saying, okay, this is my list. How do I even ask for certain things or whatever? So I had to learn how to budget so that I could actually stay in Ghana for more than a few months at a time.
What I was about to jump in and say is, like, you kind of you just kind of spoke to something that I realized as well living here, is that you have to realize that your American eating habits are completely different. And oftentimes some of the things that you are used to eating may be really, really expensive. Like, what I found is, like, in the US, like, sharp cheddar was like one of my favorite things, like, to put on anything and everything. But you come to the continent and you find, like, cheese is, like, really, really, not only is it expensive, but people really don't eat it that much.
Yeah,
I'm telling you, it's like $15 for like a quarter piece.
Oh my God,
like just
like
a
little bitty piece.
One Salt Bay of cheddar cheese is like $20. So yeah, and then things like eating fast food. But I found, like, when I came here, it was kind of like, just don't be afraid to have, like, the local appetite. I find, like, in Nigeria, they put insane, like the Yoruba culture especially, they put insane amounts of pepper in every single thing. Like, you will literally melt your taste buds. But yeah, I started taking some of the things that were being made here, because I cook for myself sometimes as well, and start taking, like, I just don't put as much pepper in. Like, the soup may be good, or some of the thing may be good, just when I cook it myself, I don't put that ingredient thing that I don't like. Here, and also in other places, like, especially when you're with these coastal African cities, they love putting, like, fish powder or fishy whatever. And for me personally, the only thing I like to taste like fish is actual fish. So there are just certain things, that I know, like, either A, like, tighten up, bro, you're gonna just have to get used to this and start eating this, or B, just kind of, again, start making things a different way for yourself. But you got to kind of understand, like, what your staple foods are. Like, I know I survive off, like, rice. I buy a lot of spaghetti, the local lettuces, local tomatoes, and things like that to make my salads. And then, but there's ways to do it.
And also,
I think that's really important.
Go ahead.
I think that's really important. I think you will actually learn this, I think, even from some of our other guests learning on. I think you touch on a very important thing is the food, is that you do have to also know what type of food you like when you're moving abroad and what you can and can't eat, because there's nothing worse than being someplace and you can't really get with the food. Fortunately, my father's West African. He's from Sierra Leone. So Sierra Leone and Ghana pretty much have the same diet. So we eat more greens than they do, but when it comes to soups, fufu, omotuo, which are rice balls, all of this we have. But I do think that it is critical to understand what are your taste buds like. And I think, me personally, I actually lost a lot of weight living in Ghana naturally, because I didn't have access to all of this sugar. Like you said, I wasn't eating GMO. I wasn't eating preservatives food. And really, once you learn how to budget, you'll find that some of the things, basically, it's a lot cheaper to eat healthier in these countries. So when you're spending money, it's because you're eating the unhealthy things. Exactly. But if you're eating healthy, you're definitely going to be living, like, it's very affordable.
Yeah. Also,
Or more
when we
affordable.
mentioning things like cheese or whatever, these are actually opportunities for business for us, because making cheese is not that difficult.
It's not.
We have a brother in the repatriation community that has been learning to make cheese, Rondo Holmes. He is a farmer from like his core, like he is like real life farmer. He learns how, he knows, he's been working on learning how to make cheese because of the fact that when he comes to Ghana or when he goes to the Ivory Coast, or different countries, cheese is very expensive, and it's, when you do find it, you may not even find the ones that you actually like. So he's been learning while he's here in America. He's been using his COVID-19 time to actually learn how to make cheese. And I think he's working to open a creamery in one of the countries. I don't know if it's Ivory Coast or Ghana, but he'll be opening a creamery in one of those countries soon. So these are things that we can, if we think outside of the box, there's so many opportunities for us to actually make money.
And real quick, because we have to be wrapping up. I just want to talk about housing situation, because you and your family have also done something I think that most people look at, and this is you've started to build your house in Ghana as well. So for those who don't know, if you live in Ghana, it can be insanely expensive. Ghana is one of the most expensive countries in Africa to live in. We do pay our rent 1 year in advance. So the sooner you can build, the better. And I think the great thing about building on the African continent is that when you're done building, you basically own it. And I think this is in every other place except for Europe and America, where mortgages exist. But in other developing countries and middle income countries, when you build your house, you build cash and you own it. So maybe you can just touch a little bit on your building experience, Bakita, and sort of how that has enriched your life, or how maybe it has supported you being able to have more of a transient lifestyle between the U.S. and the continent.
So one thing I noticed a lot is that there's this thing where people are being told that you can move to Africa, buy some land, build a house, start a business. You're going to do all of this stuff with $1,000. No, you're not going to do it. What you're going to do is you're going to have to plan, and you're going to have to have it in your mind that I'm going to do whatever it takes. Although my husband is Ghanaian, when we first moved to Ghana, we rented a house at McCarthy Hill. We rented for 2 years, and in that 2 years time, we started building our home. One thing I think most of us kind of need to get ingrained in our head, because 9 times out of 10, those of us who are moving have never owned land, and we've never built a property. So a lot of times people ask me, how much is it going to cost for me to build a home? I can't give you that answer. For one, because the economy is, the economies are unstable. Today, the price of cement can be one thing, and it can double next week and then go back down the next week. Or the cost of iron rods could skyrocket for whatever reason. So it's hard to really say how much it takes to build a home. What I will say is I like the way West Africans build. And a lot of people actually build to a certain level where they can actually live in it, and then they continue to build. Most of us, we want to build everything and then move into it after it's built. If you have it like that, do it like that. If you don't, you can do like most Ghanaians do, and that's build and live as you go.
That's it.
For us, we actually built our our boys' quarters, which is like what we would call here maybe a mother-in-law suite or a guest house. We built our guest house first, and which was way cheaper than building the entire house. We finished the guest house first, and we made sure it has a kitchen, it has everything that we need to be able to live in it while we're building our main house. I would suggest that people do that so that you're not feeling like, oh my God, this is so overwhelming, because building can be very overwhelming, especially in Ghana, because nobody is in a rush to do anything. And you may find yourself a project that you thought was going to take you 6 months to a year, it may take you 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, I would just say, just come up with a plan that doesn't look like I need to move into it tomorrow, unless you just have the money to do that.
There's one more thing I feel like I have to touch on before we go, Cordy and Bequita. I think in one of the taglines that I was seeing, you were kind of making the connection between food security, food sovereignty, and some of the projects that you're working on. I think that with this time, again, with us having all of these protests and different things like that, in the future, we have to start creating more businesses like yours that actually not only create revenue, but create things that we need and we would have to buy or could be potentially cut off from if things go sideways. So please kind of give me your perspective on that part as well.
So one of the major components of nation building is food security. It's important that we are able to feed all of the people all of the time. And part of food security is food sovereignty for nation building. And food sovereignty is owning the food that you're growing. If we're going to continue to depend on white people to feed us, how will we ever be free? And right now, that is one of the main chokeholds they have on us, is feeding us. We're at their beck and call for food. I am guilty. I have to go to Publix or Walmart or Kroger or whatever to get my food. And it's important to me. It's important that as we make these transitions to either self-sufficiency here in America or nation building in Africa or wherever we go, we should be making sure that we're able to feed ourselves.
Amen.
Great.
Amen.
Such a great point. Great point. So I want to thank everybody that joined us today on Abroad While Black. Once again, we're here every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next week, we'll be talking to Corey Yoakley, who moved abroad to Luxembourg as a single mother. So if you are a single parent, you have interest on how you can perhaps do that, she'll be giving you a little bit more experience about her background. Encourage everybody to stay safe. If you're joining the protest, go out there and make as much change as you can. And once again, continue to keep it up so that once again, maybe there can be some progress and equality in America. It may not happen during our lifetime, but it might happen during your children's lifetime. So I don't know if Akita, you have any last words, or Sean, you have any last words that you want to sort of give out?
Yeah, I wanted to say that the main thing is we need to be networking with one another. We need to be building relationships. I can't stress how important it is for us to build relationships. If you're going to be moving abroad, you need to be seeking those who are like you in the places that you're going to be moving. So whether it's in Africa or South America or Europe, you need to be looking for making your network or building your network and building strong relationships with the diaspora abroad so that you can have a better experience. And that's pretty much like the main thing that I like try to shove down everyone's throat in our group, is that building relationships and networking is probably the most important thing that you can do for your life and for business and your living abroad while Black.
Thank you so much for that. And just a final follow up with the final comment. Whether you are moving abroad while you're Black or you plan on staying where you are, we still need to network. We still need to reach out, and we still need to build those bases. Other demographics, hey, she's back, she's up. Other demographics are doing this. If you're looking at the strength of I like to use the Jewish community as an example in the way that they've etched out certain areas of the economy for themselves so they can kind of they have leverage in that way. It's the money, it's the unity, it's the way they're sharing. We need to, whether you plan on moving anywhere or not, build out your international Black network, and let's start building a base of power that does not depend solely on the area around us. We need to have access to these global resources just like everybody else does.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you guys. Thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you guys for having
me. Real quick, if you want to get in contact with Bakita, you can reach out. We can put you directly in contact with Bakita. We'll also be posting the information for the Sister Repatriation page on the Abroad While Black, so that if you are interested in moving to Ghana and you want to join that community, you can. We do suggest that it is for those people that are seriously looking at moving to Ghana, meaning you're looking at moving in the next year or two, not like the next 10 or 15 years, but it's more so for people that are really looking at how they can plan their logistics. So we will post the information for the Sister Repat group on the Facebook page. And if you want to reach out to Bakita, you're more interested in what she does, send us a message, and then we can put you directly in contact with Bakita.
They can actually go to aquafarmsafrica.com and go to our contact section, and you can get us that way.
Perfect. So it's aquafarmsafrica.com. Perfect. Okay. Thank everyone for joining.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.